Hello. In this episode, I interviewed Shoshana Brassfield. She's a professor at Frostburg State University, and she has quite some experience teaching the reacting games. We talked about the positive and negative aspects of using reacting games. If you're interested in alternative methods of teaching philosophy, or teaching in general and philosophy in general, I am sure you will enjoy this interview.
I am Shoshana Brassfield. I'm an associate professor at Frostburg State University in the philosophy department.
Okay, I know you have used the reacting games, right? That's the name. The so what games have you used? Have you used any other? Have you used and tell me about your experience using the Democracy in Athens. That's the name, isn't it? Democracy in Athens.
The title of I've used several reacting to the past role-playing games, but we call them reacting for short. And the title of the one that you read about is The Threshold of Democracy, Athens in 403 BCE. That's the full title. Yeah. That's the one I've been using. I've used the most. I now run it in my introduction to philosophy classes in a unit about democracy. And then in my philosophy of science class, I use the trial of Galileo and Charles Darwin, the Copley Medal, and the rise of naturalism. And in my skepticism and knowledge class, I use two short games. Those games take like 4 weeks, right, depending on the game. And I use two like week-long games. One or both Climate Change in Copenhagen 2009 and London 1854, cesspits, cholera, and conflict over the Broad Street pump. So that's a fair number of reacting games.
Yeah, many. Wow, you have used many of them. So that's great because then you can tell me how they are. Because I found out about reacting games now, really, researching about your work, researching about the Hamilton school summer school project, and it was quite nice. I even got the book from Mark. His name is Mark Carnes. Mark Minds on Fire.
Mark Carnes.
Yeah. And it's great to have someone who have used, because I really want to include this and these games because they seem to be very interesting. So how was your experience? I mean, how was the outcome? Did the students engaged? Did they feel, was it hard for them to engage, or was it good? Like, did they learn? Was it like, would you say, like, I think successful, right? You've been using so many, but what would you say? How was the outcome?
I mean, very, very good. They absolutely learned. They do engage, right? Some students more than others, some classes more than others. But you know how it is, like once they see other people engaging, right, then they have more courage. So, but and yeah, I mean, they absolutely learn, and they learn. Things. I have them write a reflection statement at the end of the game, and they tell me things, right, that I wouldn't have been able to see and that I often wasn't even assessing. But they'll tell me things that are like so big. They're like, that's one of my major learning goals for the course, right? Not just specific subject knowledge, but they'll say things like, the first time I got up and gave a speech, my classmates asked me these questions and I didn't know the answers. And then after that, when I was writing my speeches, I began anticipating objections and developing my argument. And I'm like, there it is, right? Anticipating objections. Like, this is like one of my goals. Or they say, from having, it was hard to argue this thing I didn't agree with, but having stepped into someone else's shoes helped me understand the perspectives of people who think differently from me. And I'm like, yay, like that's what that's what I want. And one student said that naively, her words, she before the playing the game, she held the belief that democracy was always fair and represented everyone. But then after playing the game and experiencing the unfair advantage that she had just because of alliances with two very influential people, right? And that she was able to like get all the laws that she wanted passed, right? And she said, now I understand that things like money and influence, right, create an unfair advantage. And I was like, in the democracy, and I was like, yep, like there it is. And I could spend an hour trying to tell students that democracy isn't always fair. And, a few of them would get it at a theoretical level, right? But to sort of put it together for yourself by experiencing it is like a deeper kind of learning. So like those things are really exciting.
Yeah, you
Um,
telling me it sounds like they got the thing, philosophy for real, which
yeah,
is that moment where you feel like, oh, maybe it's different, maybe it's like this, and you start thinking
yeah,
about these
yeah,
objections. Can you
yeah,
explain, resumed, how the game works?
yeah. So they're role playing games, and the students usually buy a game book. Like this is the Threshold of Democracy game book, and it contains a description of the game and historical background information and a selection of primary texts that are assigned to them to read, right? Because they're designed for college courses, right? So they have the primary texts that we would ask our college students to read. And then um, the mechanics of the game is actually very easy to learn compared to role playing games where like there's no characters don't have a list of stats, and there are very few dice rolls, 0 to none depending on what game you're playing. And instead the students write and give arguments, right? They write speeches and they argue for a law or a resolution and try to get the group to vote for it. And right, they win, right? If they at the end of the game, right, there are the laws or the policies, right, that their character or their faction wants if they've passed. So right, so the mechanic is really like giving speeches and then voting on issues. And except it's complex. Like I said, they take most of them take weeks, right, to develop. Every student has a different character. Some of the characters are real historical people, and some of them are probable historical people or composites of people. And there are like, yeah, subplots in some of the games and secrets and like all kinds of, right, all kinds of things going on. Some of the students are assigned to factions, right, that have opposing views on a controversy, right, a big historical controversy. And so they have to do reading and they have to stand up and argue for their side on the controversy in character. And other students are indeterminate on that issue, but they want something else of their own. And so there can be deal making sometimes, right? And that kind of thing in order to achieve their objectives. But it's very complex. It all sort of kind of fits together like a puzzle when students play out their roles, and the students take the leadership roles as well. So in the Athens game, the students play citizens of Athens, and they meeting in the assembly to vote on the laws that will govern their state, I would say, to govern their democracy. But one possibility is that they vote to establish like a ruling council, and democracy goes bye-bye. Right, so like they have to debate that, for instance. And but yeah, one of the interesting things is that the classes are led by the students. The Athens has a president of the assembly, the president was drawn by lot in Athens and changed. And so, right, there's a different president drawn by at random from the students for every day in the Athens game, whereas in other games, right, it'll be the same person or someone that gets elected. But they get to experience that. And then they lead the assembly, and I sit in the back taking notes. I think they think that the instructor doesn't do very much during these games, but like actually it's a lot of work that happens like in the background and in the preparation and corresponding privately with individual students, nudging them or right, helping them in one way or another. But during class, right, I sit in the back and they take over and they do what they do. And I try my best, right, to stay out of it and give the leadership and the authority decisions to whoever is the presiding leader of the day. And in the middle of the Athens game is the trial day where they try Socrates. And sometimes he lives and sometimes he dies, right? Depending on how they argue. And Socrates is not a character, one, because it would be hard to be Socrates, but because, right, most of the games are designed so that like that principal character, like Galileo in the Galileo game, is not in the game. And as a result, everyone has to sort of argue over how to interpret their work. Whereas if they were there, they'd say, well, this is what I meant, right? So by taking them out, right, everyone has to read it and then argue for an interpretation. So of course, that trial of Socrates goes very differently from the one that I have them read about in the Apology, because Socrates isn't there. And instead you have people arguing on his behalf. But my students know what happened, right, in the original trial before the game. So that informs them as well.
Oh, this is super fun because I'm thinking how it subverts the structure of a class as well, not with like the lecture talking, let the students like empower students.
Absolutely.
And they can contrast their own experience with what they read. So they read the trial and then they have go to for the experience. What about the other ones that you use like it follows the same dynamics. Like it's a trial. Is it always a trial? Something like this?
It isn't always a trial. But it helps, right? The games tend to be focused on a decision that's made by some voting body, right? So that you have that vote in order to decide who wins and who doesn't. So. Right, in the trial of Galileo, right, it's the Holy Office. In the Charles Darwin game, it's the Royal Society, the Fellows of the Royal Society, which is a very, it's a very sort of calm and gentlemanly, right, decorous game, I should say, in comparison to the Galileo game, where there's just like all kinds of intrigue going on. Which seems appropriate. And then, yeah, in London, they are the Sanitary Commission or something like that, right? Like that's deciding, that has the authority to decide, right, what measures should be taken to try to curb the cholera epidemic. And so, right, they all have some sort of voting body, and then students make arguments and vote on it.
Yeah, these experiences, I one day I will try them. I hope one day I will try them. They're working on the streets. Hopefully the noise is not bothering too much. Hopefully you can still...
I can't hear it, yeah.
Oh, so that's perfect. So my other question would be that if you have any criticisms about how the game works, did you need to change anything? Did anything went negative? I'm speaking this from, I spoke to Rebecca Scott, and she said that like, well, everything, there is a negative aspect to everything, but it's not like the classic way of teaching has no negatives. It has many negatives as well. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Were there any negative aspects in using the games?
I mean, of course, there are always downsides, and there are a few different kinds of downsides, right? It takes up a chunk of your class, right, that you're not covering content during, right, and you're only learning about democracy, right? Now, half of my class now we're learning about democracy, because I also frame it, with readings about democracy before and afterwards, right, that help them. I try to put ones before that sort of give them some resources for arguments they make in game, and some of them afterwards, right, that help them reflect on what they learned about democracy, and so that they can then write an essay about that. And actually, like, their final essay, I have them write, and based on those texts used outside the game, but I encourage them to then illustrate their thesis with examples from the game or from their own lives, right, because they've just seen some of this play out. So but it takes a big chunk of your class. There's a lot of chaos. You have to have a high chaos tolerance as an instructor, because every student has a different role and they're all trying to ask you questions before class and during class. And right, there are different people are giving speeches on different days, and you're trying to keep track of whether everybody gave a speech, and people are turning in different kinds of assignments on different days. And then, yeah, there's a lot of chaos that you have to have a tolerance for. And it ends up being a lot of work for the instructor,
Yeah, I was going to ask
behind the
this. It
scenes. Yeah.
it seems that it's a lot of work for you that you're gonna have to answer emails, and it is it like lots of work. Like it must be, right? Yeah, but it pays off.
I mean, it is a lot of work, right? Absolutely. I mean, I think it's worth it. Like, the game itself is like ready to go, and all the roll sheets are ready to go unless you make changes, as people do. But it's still like just a lot to keep track of and everything. But I think it's worth it. Of course, I'm trying to think of. I mean, the other thing, right, that's difficult is, for the student, is there is an absurd amount of things that they need to learn all at once. And right, that I don't know if it's possible, right, for the instructor to prepare students enough, right, for the game in advance, partly because they're all interdisciplinary, and I mean, I think, they fit well into a lot of history classes, right? I frame them, right, to bring out the philosophical issues. Some of them are used in science classes, so they're used in different classes. They're all very interdisciplinary, and no instructor is an expert on everything that comes up in these games. And then, so this, they have not enough lead up time. And then the students, not only they have to read about the game rules, which are simple, but still, and they have to read about the historical background, and they're assigned primary texts to read and draw on in their assignments, and they have their character description. And then at the bottom of their roll sheet, most of the time there are suggestions for further reading that's just for their character. And right, it's an absurd amount of things that they have to learn in an incredibly short time. And I feel like the sort of maybe, at least for the instructors, it's sort of an open secret, is that no one has ever prepared when they go up and give their speeches, and there's always something that they didn't read. And so it's intimidating for the students I have to got to stand up and give a speech on something that you just started learning about yesterday. Right. That's very intimidating. And it's a challenge, right, that for many of them that they have to face. But then see, the upside of this is that once they've done it a few times, they start to realize that they can wing it, right? That they can stand up and say words about a thing that they're not actually an expert on, and even if their speech wasn't very good, the world didn't end, and right, they didn't die of shame, and they weren't laughed off the stage, right, and they got through it. And just knowing that you can stand up and wing it in front of a group if you have to is so empowering. Right, that means like there's so many right things right that you can do, that you know, speak at a protest rally, speak at a city council, right, give a presentation for your job, like all these moments when you might have the opportunity or the obligation to stand up and speak about something, and knowing like that you don't have to know everything and you'll get through it, is, I think, incredibly empowering. And not it's funny, like it's not a thing we think that we should be teaching students, sort of how to wing it with not enough prep, right? But actually, it's an incredibly important skill. It's way more important than having the super prepared speech and reading it. And they're asked, you know, so with middling success, right, to speak extemporaneously when they get up in front of the class.
That is
Unlike some of our colleagues in philosophy.
This is very interesting because that's something that it has been a constant. I spoke to Russell Marcos and to Rebecca Scott, and now I'm speaking to you. How the games, many different games, they help students to participate and to talk because they're not afraid of the judgment. And it's so common in class, in the environment of the class, for students to feel like, I don't want to say anything stupid. Even when we say like, oh, there's nothing stupid to be said, they will feel judged and they don't say anything. And it seems to me that from what you said and what I interviewed the others is that it really includes people, and that's so powerful. I imagine that it is so powerful.
It really does. A lot of them have like assigned factions, which also helps them, right? That they've got people on their side. And yeah, one of the things that they get, right, is that spontaneous debate that happens that doesn't usually happen in a traditional discussion class. A student says one thing and then the instructor talks, and another student says one thing and the instructor talks. But they're talking to each other and they're debating each other. And it matters, right, that the questions and the objections are coming from other students. That matters a lot to them. And so, yeah, and one of the things that they say, right, is they get practice with extemporaneous, spontaneous speaking. And that's an important skill. And I think it's more important than the other kind of speaking.
The other question I had doesn't really apply, I think, because when we use games, one worry I have is that the students might not learn the argumentation, which is very important in at least the let's say classic academic philosophy. But I think that for that game in specific, it seems that they do learn argumentation. Like you said, like they're always thinking of objections. Even before meeting, you said in the beginning, they're like, oh, they will say this, so let me say this. And that's perfect. That is just what it is.
Yeah. But I would say, like, it's not the same. I think that the arguments that they make are not the careful theoretical textual analysis that we might want from a standard philosophy essay. And for that reason, like I have most of the weightier assignments are assignments that I give outside the game, right, or surrounding the game, rather than the things they're writing for the game. But it's a trade-off because, like, so those very careful analytical kinds of arguments that in a standard philosophy essay, right, they're happening in this kind of isolated, protected theoretical space, right, that we have to really, just think about these abstract principles or whatever it is. And there's, we value that. And what happens is, right, because the games are all about these historical controversies, right, and these turning points. They're the philosophical issues that they're arguing about are in the form of controversies that have a deadly serious practical impact. And Right. So when you encounter, right, philosophy in the world in ways that where it matters to the world, it's all tangled up with culture and religion and politics and money and historical context because life is all tangled up among all those things. And so, right, when the philosophical controversies, right, right, have this real world impact, the arguments become partisan and political more than, right, very abstract and subtle. And you'll oftentimes, right, you'll have characters who are playing philosophers or scientists sort of, right, pleading for people to care about their arguments. And they are confronted with the reality that the important decisions actually get made based on power or money or behind the scenes deal making. And I mean, and I think that's a super important truth, right? To confront that are very careful, very rational arguments that should persuade people are often not the thing that matters. And so, like, if you're trying to truly understand both why Galileo was right and the Pope condemned him anyway, or you're trying to understand, like, why the citizens of Athens voted to execute Socrates, you need to understand the whole context that the philosophical arguments occur in. And so, and so it's a trade off. You're trading the subtlety and abstraction for something, for a controversy where something is at stake and where you have to take account of the material causes and effects as well as the logical ones. And so I think there are, right, reasons. Well, I mean, and I think they're right. There are some other contributing reasons, right? Namely that, like, they just started studying this period in history and so forth, right? That you don't get the kind of subtle analysis in a regular essay. But I think, the trade-offs are valuable ones anyway.
Hmm. Uh, that's what you said. It connects with my other question because it seems that it's a philosophy which is not so much like the pure hygienic essay kind of philosophy, which is like academic philosophy. Let's say it's a philosophy that's more real world philosophy, which I don't know. Maybe it was like this in Greece. That's how at least I romanticize philosophy in Greece. It's the philosophy
Right,
in real
right.
world. So do you think that we can do philosophy with games? So like beyond learning, can we do philosophy by playing games or designing games? What do you think?
um well, it depends on, I guess it depends on what you mean by doing philosophy. So these games anyway are not designed to yield a scholarly article that you could publish in Reds Philosophica. And probably if there was a game that did that, it wouldn't be that much fun. But but I think I mean, there's a difference between publishing and doing. I'm not sure whether there's a difference between learning and doing philosophy. But there's a difference between publishing philosophy and doing philosophy. And I think that we're doing philosophy when anytime we clarify a fundamental concept or we discover a basic underlying belief or assumption, and then we try to work out the reasons for it. So like, I think we do philosophy outside of academia all the time. And what these kinds of role-playing games do is, like, they specially pick scenarios that will confront us with big fundamental questions like, what makes a democracy truly democratic, or can science ever tell us what's real? Right, and they pick, right, moments in history where society was having this controversy and confront us with that big philosophical question. And then the game structure gives us a victory condition. All right, and you want the answer to that question to be, this, and rules that are the limits of, the time period and what your character believes. And so, but I think you can be doing philosophy even if the argument you produce isn't one you agree with, as long as you are yourself, right, thinking about that philosophical problem and what its answers are. And I think this is no different from what historians of philosophy do, and that's my specialization. Right, and when we do history of philosophy, what we're writing is limited by what the author believes and or says, right, and what is available, what the beliefs are in the time period. But as historians of philosophy, we still consider ourselves to be doing philosophy because, right, while we do that, we are still confronting and finding solutions to knotty philosophical problems. And so I think you can do that in a game. And I think writing a game, if it was designed for a philosophy class, would certainly force you to do that. Would it yield some original thought that no one thought of before? I don't know. I mean, right? Like I feel like as philosophers, right, it's hard to say whether the things that we're coming up with are truly original anyway. I don't think it has to be the case that no one has thought of it before in order for you to be doing philosophy when you think of it.
I couldn't agree more what you said, yes, because I guess it's because I'm finishing a PhD, and so doing philosophy in academia, you get, of course, you get trained for that kind of philosophy, and it makes sense, of course. But philosophy is very rich, the philosophy word. I mean, we do philosophy all the time, like you said. It's everywhere. And so students learning, it's learning something that's important for everyone, should be taught in schools and everywhere. I would love that when I was learning philosophy to have done this process of like learning through games. I would have loved that.
Yeah.
And hopefully I will do that teaching as well, because maybe it would be more interesting as well, right? Because sometimes I feel that professors, they feel bored. They don't want to teach because they feel bored that they have to teach. And it's important as well to bring fun for everyone, for the teachers, for the students, and for everyone.
Well, I should say that there is, and if you search for this, right, there is a Reacting to the Past Faculty Institute. Actually, and there are a couple of conferences every year that are designed for faculty to come together and play these games themselves, and then oftentimes, right, as a preparation, because you're thinking you might want to teach it, but you don't know what the game is yet. And then there are presentations about pedagogy and how to, about running games and teaching with these games as well at those conferences. And they are a ton of fun. And so I would recommend, if you can get to one, put that on your wish list, right? For when you have money for going to conferences, right? I would put that on your wish list, right? To go to the Reacting Institute.
Well, I didn't know this one. That's really nice. I would definitely put it. Maybe one day. I have never heard of this. I'm here in England, in Manchester, and I never heard of this here in England. But well, yeah, one day if I go to the United States, I can go to that conference. It would be really nice. Just different. Yeah. So, do you have anything more to say? Is there anything you would like to add?
Good question. I feel like I haven't described all of the games, but I feel like I've hit on what the pedagogy is like. It really, it takes a commitment to do something like this, and right, and you have to think about how you're going to frame it in your class to draw out the philosophical lessons that you want. Right, the same games are used in multiple disciplines, right? Presumably to draw out different lessons. And it takes a commitment. I think, right, having a chance to play a game, if you do have that chance, right, is a good way, right, to have an idea of like what it is you would be taking on. But it's transformative. It really is. It's just exciting, right, to see your students sort of just getting excited and planning, and yeah, it's just it's a lot of fun. So
yeah, yeah, we could talk so much more because you have tried many different games of this, and could talk about all of these different games. Yeah, it seems very interesting, these games, and I'm very happy that I got to interview you, to include your experience.
I'm
Uh,
glad that yeah that you heard about me through Russell and that you called me up. Absolutely. And definitely talk to Mark Carnes. He's like the big personality behind Reacting to the Past and a co-author on a number of these games, including the Athens game.
yeah, I'll try to get in
So
touch with
yeah.
him. I'm reading his book, The
hmm
Mind on
Mine's
Fire.
on fire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Minds on
Yeah. And
Fire.
you
Yeah.
mentioned, right, the subversive aspect, right? That's one of the things that he talks about this, right. That yeah, that students have this I hadn't, I don't usually think of it that way, but of course, yeah, there's something fun about not having the teacher in charge. And I have to say, like, I've seen just transformations. Right, one of the lessons for me is that I need to talk less in my class. And I should say, one of the benefits of this that was there are a lot of unanticipated, unintended learning benefits. One of them is leadership skills. Students get cast in these leadership positions. They're a president or a chairman or a pope. And then they have to, right, lead the discussion. And there have been some moments, like I remember a game where the people who were supposed to give speeches that day were not prepared. One of them was absent, and the other one was like, I'm not that well prepared. If he's not here, then I'm not going to speak. And I was like, okay, well, this is the topic that was on your agenda for today. And all of you have objectives that you want to accomplish that you haven't accomplished yet. So have a discussion. Look at, look, and then I shut up, and the student who was the president, right, realized, right, and then there was a long silence, right, and the student who's the president was like, okay, so the topic is this thing, who wants to say something about it? And then there was a long silence, and I saw students begrudgingly crack open their books and look at the thing that they were supposed to be talking about, right, and take a few minutes to read it. And then someone asked a question, and then someone said, no, I don't think that you're interpreting that right. I think it means this thing. And then I watched them have a genuine discussion about how to understand this text, this primary text, that was I had no hand in at all. And I was like amazed, right? I was like, this is what I want my students to be doing, is to be sitting there, like looking at the text, right? Arguing over what it means. And that happened because I did nothing and people were unprepared.
That is so crazy, right? Because we
Right?
think about like, oh, students should prepare, and the professor needs like to control the thing, and it's the
Yeah.
opposite. Like
Yeah.
you lost the control, they were not prepared, and it happened.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And
beautiful.
it's
Yeah.
like, right, backing off. And right when the students realize that I'm not going to intervene and lead a discussion, right, and that they have to fill up the time somehow, right, they step up. And it's amazing to watch that happen in my classes. And it's amazing to watch students develop leadership skills that I didn't know that they had, that sometimes they didn't know that they had. And to realize, right, oftentimes, right, that doesn't involve that much, right? They're worried, like, what do I have to do to lead this? And they realize all they have to do is say, does anybody have something they want to say about this? That was it, right? Like, that was what you, the person in charge, needed to do, right? And in fact, the last semester, I remember in the assembly, I had a student who was really nervous about being the president and really anxious about what to do and needed some coaching about what to say as president, right? And right, they got up to the front and they sat in the front and they looked out, waiting for someone to come up and give a speech, and nobody did. And there was this long silence. And then they looked sort of down at the sheet and then they said, like, so does anybody want to give a speech? Right, really tentatively. And as soon as they finally said that, somebody stood up and walked to the front and gave a speech. And I was like, yes, and I was I was just happy, right, that they were able to experience, right, that everybody was waiting for them to ask, and that the moment they asked, I wasn't sure actually that that's what people were waiting for, but right, I was just happy that, right, that they did it themselves, right, without my having to intervene and lead for them, and that they were able to experience, right, that people, that they were in authority and people were waiting for them to ask. It was just a great moment, right, to see that happen. And it just happened because I wasn't trying. In fact, I wasn't just not trying to be in charge. I was actively trying not to be in charge. I have to sit on my hands sometimes, in order, like, not to. And sometimes other students will help them out, and which might or might not be okay, depending, right? Again, right, it's all depends on the game context. And one of the things that they're learning, right, is what it means to be a leader. And so in last semester, I had a student who had the secret objective of taking over. And so when they stepped in and started, like, taking the vote counts instead of the president doing it, I said nothing because I knew that people were going to start seeing that character as a leader because they were stepping in and leading when the actual president wasn't. And so I was like, all right, yeah, that seems like one good way to get people to see you as a leader and put you in power, right? And so, like, just what, and then afterwards, when interesting important things like that happen, oftentimes, like, afterwards, I'll talk to students and I'll point out, did you see what happened there, right? Did you see how this happened? Did you see how it was that you all just voted to give up democracy and to, you voted away your right to vote? Right, let's think about how that happens to you and why that happens to you, or that kind of thing, right? So I like to call out, right, interesting dynamics that happened in the class so that they, can actually, make it a learning experience, that they realize about what happened. It's, yeah.
Oh, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. That was so nice. This last thing that you said. Now they stretched the interview a bit. That was so good. This last thing, because it made what you were saying made me think of education like a fire, right? So you need something to that will be on fire. But you need oxygen, and you cannot. You need to let oxygen. You need to let it breathe. And need to let it happen. Then we'll flourish. They will flourish. And maybe we underestimate our students, right?
I think, yeah, I think, we do. And we tend to fill the silence with our talking, and we're used to that. Yeah, I mean, we panic when there's a silence and we're in charge. And so it's hard to let that uh, sit, right? And I think really a thing that I need to think about is, in my regular classes that aren't reacting classes, right? How do I create those moments that will draw students out, right? Where are the moments where I need to back off and let students do the talking? And I'm sure there are a lot of them, and I need to figure out, okay, how do I build that in so I'll remember when the moment is there, right? To not answer the question, or right, to let the silence linger, right, until right, one of the quieter, more hesitant students, right,
I
comes up with something to say. Yeah.
When I'm doing my teaching is just TAs, just as a tutor, but as a tutor, so I always talk too much, and then I feel that, like, first I shouldn't be talking too much, but then I think that by talking it's a way to hide because the silence is uncomfortable, and then when I talk too much, I get home and after, I don't know, 4 classes, I'm tired, very tired, because oh my god, I had to talk, and it just feels things are not going the right
It takes a
direction.
lot of energy. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think there's a natural instinct, right, to want to, right, to want to teach, to want to share things that I figured out, right, that you haven't figured out, whether it's right part of a class or just part of, right, teaching life lessons, right? We want to teach our children, don't lie, right? And we don't want them to have to learn that the hard way, and how awful it is, right, when you get caught in a lie or whatever. Right. And so we're like, I figured that out and I want to just tell you and have you learn it from me, instead of having to work it out from yourself. And so there's that instinct, right, to tell people what we've already figured out. And the frustrating thing, and I feel like Socrates has been telling me this, right? And I'm not putting it into practice, right? But the truth is, it's not a very telling people things is not a very effective way of teaching, sadly, as much as we want it to be. And I think it's natural that we want it to be. We want to save them the trouble of learning it for themselves. But the truth is, you can only, you can't learn for someone else. You have to learn things yourself, and you have to sometimes, and then when you do, and when you work it out for yourself, right, that's a lesson that stays with you, and in the way that, right, the things that you hear from your teacher in a lecture, just they don't stay with you in the same way, or you remember them but they have only like a theoretical significance. They don't have an emotional significance for you. And so, but I mean, I think it's absolutely, like, it's forgivable. It's a natural instinct, just to when you're watching them struggling, right, and to say, like, oh, here, like, I figured it out, right, let me give you this thing that you haven't worked out yet. And just, right, it turns out that it's not nearly as effective as, and it's hard. I mean, I think as teaching, it's harder to come up with ways of prompting our students, right, or of setting up the right questions, right, to prompt them to work something out on their own, right, and to give them, like, sort of like just the right amount of help, so that they can reach that conclusion on their own. Like, designing classes that do that is, of course, it's the gold standard, but it's very difficult. I don't claim to have it figured out.
That was very nice, Shoshana. I love that conversation. I love this conversation. It was really, really nice.
Well, thank you.